there, safe crackers. Get your combinations ready, because it's time for the Comic Vault. A vault full of comics. There's a bunch of them. And they're in the vault from which I am pulling issues 1 through 6 of Garth Ennis' Shadow from Dynamite. I believe I reviewed issue 1. Today, I'm adding 2 through 6. So, issue 1, I believe what I said was that it was worth picking up because it would be interesting to see where he takes it. Garth Ennis had a lot of potential for the Shadow series. Now, here is why I was excited about him, and also I'll tell you something that he said that I felt was really interesting and a good approach to writing the Shadow. First of all, I think he has a great respect for history. He's written some historical comic books, and I find them to be extremely interesting. He's written some war books, and those are extremely interesting. I like it when Garth Ennis researches something or uses his own personal knowledge. I don't know how much he has to research, but it's very evident that the thing that he enjoys is history, and it shows up in his books, and it really shows in his writing style, and I like that. I think that's worthwhile. You don't get a lot of that. Not a lot of things feel researched, or researched well anyway. And I feel like Garth Ennis knows what he's doing when it comes to trying to tie his stories into a historical perspective. He said something in one of his interviews that I read in a comic book that I thought was really on the spot. And he said that he's not going to use, or at least they're all written out, but he said, forward thinking, that he's not going to use the laugh quite as much as it appeared in some of the older comic books. Reason being is that he felt it was oversaturated. Too many laughs took away from the potency or the power or the impact of that laugh. Now, when you look at some of the older comics and you see that laugh all over the page, every panel, it's almost like saying, I don't feel like drawing background, so I'm going to write the word ha 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 ha, so that I don't have to draw background. And so artistically it becomes an issue, so maybe it takes away a little bit from the beauty or mystique of the artist's job. And not to say that it wasn't worthwhile back in some of the older Shadow comics, or even in some of these newer Shadow comics that are going to be coming out. I don't know what they're going to do with it, so maybe they'll toss some of that in there. But I think Garth Ennis had a point. Reason being, think about a little, or like somebody who cusses all the time, and you hear that guy drop the F-bomb, you're not going to get freaked out. You hear a little church lady drop the F-bomb, and suddenly, everything stops, and the preacher says, Meredith, stop talking in church, or, whatever. But I think Garth Ennis was onto something. I think he had a really good idea with trying to use the laugh in appropriate places. Now, well, here's something that's interesting. This is just a little complaint that I have. I feel like he's pulling from some of his other books for his characterizations, or maybe he's just trying to, or maybe these are just stock characters that now he has in his mind that he wants to use quite often. I feel like Buffalo Wong, one of the characters, I think his name's Buffalo Wong, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, Buffalo Wong, one of the characters in this book, is a little too much like Love Sausage. He's a little too much like Love Sausage from the Boys books. Now granted, Love Sausage was a comedic character, and he was fun and funny in the Boys. Granted, it's gross humor, intentionally disgusting, and or intentionally even sexual. So when you look at the Boys, it's perfectly fits within that realm. In this one, in the Shadow, I don't feel like it fits so well. I feel like it comes out of nowhere. Now, granted, it's interesting to see these Japanese characters having to deal with, or Japanese characters, these military men, having to deal with Buffalo Wong. I feel like that's an interesting idea, but I don't feel like it really seemed. I don't know if the word diegetic works. I've only ever heard of diegetic in the realm of music, being diegetic and extra diegetic, but it feels like it doesn't feel like it's generated within the scene. It doesn't feel like this character is generated from the world. It feels like he's tossed in there and said, deal with it. So, moving on, there's little done in scene, and that bothers me quite a lot. Now, when I say there's little done in scene, of course, if you're speaking, if you're breathing, you're always physically doing something, so I'm not trying to argue against that. But there are very few character moments in this book, and there are very few decisions made within the scenes that we have. A lot of the time, especially in the early, I think, 4, maybe the first 5 even, I remember getting almost to the end of the series and saying, oh, now finally something's happening. All of the action takes place off-screen. Off-screen, it's a comic book. Off-panel. All of the action takes place before or after the scenes that Ennis gives us. So when you look at a lot of the scenes are just two people talking about what had just happened, or what had happened before the book that's influencing what's happening now, or before the story started. So, i.e., before issue 1. That's fine, talking about what happened before issue 1. But when you have action happening within the confines of 1 and 6, it bothers me, the idea that we're not going to see that. Why would you take away things that would add to your rising action? Why would you not show us that? Well, I have one idea, that maybe Garth Ennis didn't want to write a shadow book. Maybe he wanted to write a book about these particular Japanese characters having a hard time getting this particular covert mission to come to fruition. Maybe he wanted to write a story about these two Japanese military men having to deal with Wong. Maybe that's what the story is, because that's what almost all of the story is. And maybe he just wanted to write a 4-issue series. I really feel like that's what he wanted to do. Now, that's something that Garth Ennis has in the past said, that he doesn't really, or to my understanding that's what he's said, that he doesn't care for superheroes and he doesn't like writing them. So why do it? I guess somebody gives you money. You do what they tell you to do. But that's the thing, is I feel like he wanted to get this World War II book written, and he didn't care if the Shadow was really in it. So the Shadow seems forced on the book. The Shadow himself does extremely little. He has a peripheral involvement. The only thing that the Shadow really does is he ushers some of these events into happening. So he has a scene where he attacks a guy on a dock and gets information, and then goes and follows these people. And then he has a scene where he does this and that, and he goes and he follows some more people. It seems to be that Lamont Cranston, well, the Shadow shows up very little. We get mostly Lamont Cranston. And it seems to be what they're doing is following around the action, making sure things happen in the way that he wants it to happen. Now, I'm all for the Shadow being mysterious, the Shadow working in ways that are not just walking around shooting people and clouding men's minds. I'm all for that. I think that's okay. But I feel like you have to do more than watch things happen just in case they step out of line. And that's what he really does. He doesn't do a lot more than a couple of scenes he turns into the Shadow to prevent him and Margot Lane from being killed by people who I'm not sure exactly as to why they even care that Lamont Cranston's in the book. It's almost an obligatory action scene. Action scenes should progress the narrative and not just be tossed in there so that we don't get bored. Again, he spends very little time as the Shadow. I feel like if you are going to spend time as Lamont Cranston, the Shadow stuff should be a payoff. We don't need to see the Shadow on every page. We don't need to see his sprawling laugh. We don't need to see all of that. What we need to see is a payoff for the Shadow doer, for Lamont Cranston doing the things that he does. If what he's doing is important, then him turning into the Shadow should be equally as important, even if there's little time spent as the Shadow. We get very little use of his powers. Mostly he just shoots his guns. Granted, you know, maybe the idea that he is such an effective fighter, maybe the fact that he is such an effective gunman, is that, or gunslinger, or whatever you wish to call him, is because he has these powers. So therefore, his powers are being used, but not to a great extent. Granted, if Lamont Cranston plays a peripheral role, and the Shadow plays an even more peripheral role to Lamont Cranston, even though those people are one and the same, or at least within this continuity, then the problem is that the powers don't even matter at some point. If the Shadow's tossed in there for action, and Lamont Cranston is tossed in there just so that you can call it a Shadow book, it's a problem. On top of that, the time that we do spend with Lamont Cranston, he does extremely little. And his characterization is frustrating. He's extremely arrogant, which, fair enough, he's the Shadow. You have to make him an interesting character, not just arrogant. You can't just have a person walk on the screen and say some horrible things to his companion, or companions, considering he has a few, let's call them minions. Margot Lane and the other gentleman whose name escapes me at the moment. But he does very little, and he's rude. He's not likable. There's nothing. He uses some powers, and the only real interesting thing that the Shadow or that Lamont Cranston really adds to the book is on the very last 2 pages, so I'm not going to ruin that for you. But he does end up using his powers for divination of some kind. But he treats Margot Lane like a child. Now, granted, I get it. This takes place in a different time period. We can't just look at them and say, oh, well, they should act the same way that we act. But if you're going to choose something to make someone palatable, make a character palatable, why change the dialogue to something that's anachronistic and hard to swallow, and really make somebody more unlikable, and then keep the this disrespect that people tend to have for gender relations, or maybe not disrespect for gender relations, but you understand what I'm saying. And that's just it. Margot Lane doesn't even have a problem with this, and I say, okay, fine. I understand what they're trying to achieve here. But you have to make the characters likable in another way. Maybe not likable, but relatable. The Shadow doesn't do anything of great significance. The Shadow, i.e. Lamont Cranston, doesn't do anything of great significance. And so we don't get to follow him around and say, wow, he's so good at what he does. No wonder he's so arrogant. So we just look at the Shadow and say, man, you're such a... oh, can't say that word. You're such an awful guy. And Margot Lane seems to follow you around because you drag her all over the world. Now, that's another thing. And I don't mind this. In fact, it was one of the reasons that the Shadow was slightly controversial at times, was what role does Margot Lane really play? Because basically Margot Lane is faithful companion to the Shadow. She follows him around, helps him with his crime solving, does whatever he wants her to do. So they're not married. They're not exclusively in a relationship, not that we're aware of, or at least in the older continuities prior to this one. So it makes her a little bit difficult to pin down as to who she's supposed to be, what she's trying to achieve. But in this book, Garth Ennis removes all doubt. He says well, he doesn't say that, but he makes it very apparent that she is a sexual companion to the Shadow, who is apparently paid for her companionship by being dragged around the world, by being invited to go with the Shadow around the world just because she helps him. And that makes her less interesting. She does some interesting things throughout the book. She does more than the Shadow in the way of becoming an interesting character. But, so, the real story happens between, as I said earlier, because Garth Ennis wanted to write a story about that, between these 2 Japanese guys who are extremely unlikable. They spend their time trying to backstab everyone they know so that they can get a better deal for the Japanese military. And then they spend their time trying to backstab each other, so therefore things inevitably fall apart. Wong spends his time trying to backstab everybody as well. So the people who actually have a moment of change, or actually have an opportunity for change, are these Japanese characters. And it does come, so there is a story arc that happens, or there is a character arc that happens for at least one of the 3 characters that we end up following. None of them are likable. Nobody is relatable, and it's pretty much a book that's based on greed and people doing things that are just self-serving. Even the Shadow is self-serving in the idea that he's just going out there and achieving things because he knows he can. Now, granted, I think it's debatable to say that he actually achieves anything within the confines of the book. It's more like he just knows it's going to happen and then wants to watch it. So, or at least wants to make sure that it happens. Now, I think that's really all I have to say. It was 6 issues worth of largely being boring, and I was hugely disappointed by this book, by the first 6 issues. Now, Victor Gischler, has taken over the series for now, and I'm not reviewing that one, but we'll see how it unfolds. I'm not reviewing that one right now, but I like the art. I like his approach to the Shadows Laugh, and I like his need to try to tie history into it because I feel like that's necessary. But overall, I cannot support this book, so I'm going to keep buying it. I hope that issues 7 through whatever turn out to be better. And I'm still going to be looking for Garth Ennis stuff because I like Garth Ennis and I think what he does is worthwhile. I just think that he should be doing projects that he wants to do rather than projects that he's... Well, I'm not sure. I feel like he needs to have more passion in a project for it to become worthwhile. Preacher was amazing. The first 30 issues of The Boys was great. So things that he's passionate about usually turn out good. But anyway, moving on. Thanks for watching the Comic Vault, guys, and tune in next time when we review more comics. And if you would like to donate to the Comic Vault, help it become even more vast and unknowable, you can go to Geekvolution, or you can send things to Geekvolution, P.O. Box 14183, Lenexa, Kansas 66285. Thanks for watching the Comic Vault, guys. And remember, man, I can't say that word anymore. Support your local comic book store, because it's worthwhile. We'll see you next time.